Hiya, Honest Discussioner here. The other day I responded to the real Darth Kai on the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Now, while his video was titled Kalam Cosmological Argument, Kalam was really only about half the video, and that half was intending to prove that there must be some sort of personal entity that caused the universe. The second half has absolutely nothing to do with Kalam, but to show that Jesus was divine. It's the classic William Lane Craig, really. Show a deity exists, and then show how Jesus has to be that deity. Well, I already attempted to show that Kyle's version of Kalam was incorrect by stating that consciousness requires time, so the cause of the universe could not be personal. He put out a response earlier today if you want to check it out. The link is in the underbar. Today, however, I want to refute his reasons for claiming that Jesus must be the Son of God. Before I do that, however, there were a lot of comments on the last video, and quite a few of them were about Kyle's claim that vacuums require matter to suck in. I was aware that his analogy wasn't exactly perfect, that he's mistaking a vacuum cleaner for the vacuum of space, and also with the gravity well that a black hole has, and a few other things on top of that. The reason I didn't bring it up was that I considered it a smaller point, and I didn't think it needed to point that out in order to refute his overall argument. The video was already long enough. So let's move on to Kyle's reasoning for why Jesus was God.
First, I'm going to point out that now that we've seen how it is that there must be a deity that's responsible for existence, we then must accept the fact that miracles are something which is also possible.
Meh. I could maybe argue against this, but I feel like I'd be nitpicking right out of the gate, so for the moment, let's give him this one.
To show how the resurrection of Jesus Christ is in fact something which we must accept as being true, I am going to give you what is historical evidence of the resurrection.
You know, I wonder how many historians would ever really use those words, must be true. I didn't have time to do this, but what I'd like to do later on is to send out some emails to well-respected historians and ask them how many things that have a large amount of evidence for them are considered things that must be true. Something maybe from the Middle Ages, let's say. I wonder how many would be willing to bet their life on it. I'll get back to you on that one.
Now, what historical evidence am I talking about? Well, first of all, historians agree that something which is taught and is most closely to the fact that's related to truth must be taught within the first 2 to 3 years in order for it to be accepted as being true.
First off, I've noticed that nowhere in Kyle's videos does he actually cite any sources. We heard in the first part about all the scientists that accepted Kalam, and now he's asserting again what historians say. I'm going to check up on these facts later, but in the meantime, I'd like to point out a few things first. Islam was preached as it was being recorded and as it was happening. Check out the Wikipedia link in the underbar. Does that make it true? Second, even if the gospel was preached, we know that even the written word has many transcription errors, as evidence from Bart Ehrman's work in misquoting Jesus. We can point to enough differences in the gospel narratives themselves, and if we bring it in all of the other gospels that were never considered, there were a lot of differing opinions on the gospels, a lot of different stories as to what really happened with Jesus. I don't see this as something that's so solid as to base your entire life around.
Well, let's go down to the fact that now there are 500 documented witnesses that both saw the crucifixion and the resurrection. They saw the death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection of his life.
Really? Who were they? What were their names? Can you give me even 50 of their names? That's a mere 10%. Or are you just going off the book of John? You see, the interesting thing about the Gospel of John is that it's the latest Gospel. According to Wikipedia, it was written towards the end of the 1st century. Why, then, is such astounding evidence only found in that one Gospel? The thing is, you see a clear progression in the Gospels. The later it is, the more supernatural the claims become. Mark was the earliest, and in that book, it ends with the women leaving the tomb. Jesus was never seen in the flesh in that one. By the time you get to John, people are poking the resurrected Jesus in his wounds. If there were really that many people talking about how they saw Jesus again, why did none of the other gospel authors know of this? Is it possible this is merely a rumor that got out of hand? You see, Kyle started this by saying how early it was preached, but the 500 was not preached early. The timeline of the Gospels themselves attest to how the phenomenon of whisper down the lane affected the telling of the Gospel narratives.
Now, some people say, well, these 500 people probably could have just make up the story and it was just widely spread after that. Well, that's not the case. Because you see, a part of these 500 people, there were many extreme Jews that both witnessed the crucifixion and then saw the resurrection. Now, when I say extreme Jews, I'm saying people that totally oppose the idea of Jesus being the Messiah. So, these people who were extreme Jews did in fact change what they believed within such a short time because they saw the death and they saw the life of Jesus Christ. And it was something that they died for.
Like who? Who are these extreme Jews you were talking about besides, of course, Paul? Who was threatened to be killed unless they renounced the resurrection and then was killed because they did not renounce the resurrection? I know of no such thing in the Bible or in history. This is basically the wouldn't die for a lie argument most associated with Lee Strobel. Prof MTH did a thorough debunking of this in a 4-part series a while back, which I will link in the underbar for those that are interested. Suffice to say, there's not historical or even biblical evidence of Christian martyrs that claim to have witnessed the resurrection.
Another evidence that we should be looking at is the tomb itself. Now, some people will say to me, well, how do we know that the tomb wasn't just robbed?
Okay, I'm going to stop Kyle right here. How do we know, beyond the Gospels, that the tomb was ever empty in the first place? Given that between the 4 Gospels that few facts about the events remain the same between the 4 narratives, these don't seem like trustworthy sources. Who found the tomb? When did they find it? Why were they going? What happened when they got there? The answers to all of these questions vary depending on which gospel you are reading. You are operating off the assumption of these books being written years after the events, with a heavy bias of explaining the death of the Messiah who was not supposed to die. This is not reliable information.
We had some women who came to the tomb and both were witnesses of what they saw. An angel appeared to them that told about the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Both? Again, John only has Mary Magdalene. Mary has 3 women. Which is it?
Now, back in the day, women's testimony was something that was not accepted at all. So, why would the angel come to them? Well,
why? It doesn't make any sense either way you slice it. How does this help your position? Whatever the real reason is, there's nothing to say the only explanation was that it was the hand of God.
Afterwards, the women went to the men and told them about what they saw, and then the men came to confirm it. And the fact is that it was something which was true.
So saith the very old book, in contradictory ways I might add. You really don't see how a bunch of people that saw the man they expected to lead them to victory dying a terribly painful death at the hands of those he was supposed to defeat might start believing that he was raised in spirit. Look at the case of Rabbi Schneerson, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who many Jews believed to be the Messiah until he died. Okay, well, actually no. After he died, they started wondering when he'd return, saying that he was resurrected. That movement is still growing to this day since he died back in the early 90s. And they say history repeats itself.
Another thing that we need to keep in mind is if Christianity was something that was just made up, why is it that it had such a widespread in such a short time? 2 to 3 months is a very short period for someone to just write a religion and then change the hearts and minds of thousands of people across a very wide amount of area.
You're absolutely right. That's why it actually took centuries. 2 to 3 months is the earliest they started preaching. Christianity was a minority for quite some time. They did experience an explosion all of a sudden, which happened to be about the same point that Emperor Constantine converted the Roman Empire to Christianity. There's other factors as well, but suffice to say, there's enough to state that it wasn't the inherent truth of the religious claims that Christianity was as successful as it was. To summarize, Kyle is attempting to turn religious text into actual history, which I think he fails at. These are not reliable testimonies, and even if they were in some way reliable, I'd argue they are nowhere near enough to say that you should base your entire life upon them. The gospel narratives follow a historical religious trend of people reformatting their beliefs when faced with the grim reality that they were wrong. We're going to see it this Saturday when the world doesn't end. We see it every time a supposed Messiah dies. The believers don't give up. They change their story. Not even on purpose. They rationalize it. If they can do that now, how easy would it have been for them to do it when people would have been willing to believe almost anything? That's about it. Have a nice day. Honest Discussioner, out.